Manchester, Hooksett, Auburn. It's the Progress Report. Here we are in the middle of September. And
End of summer. This is
end of
it.
summer. This is it. By the time we're back with you, it'll be fall, officially fall.
Or as I prefer to say, autumn.
Autumn. Yeah. Okay. Summer, spring, winter, fall.
Pumpkin season, right?
In any
Yeah,
event,
it's pumpkin
we
season.
are
Pumpkin spice. I'm sorry. Sorry.
In any event, folks, we are very happy to have with us for the first time since he's become the official Democratic nominee for the 1st Congressional District, which of course includes Manchester and our other towns that are part of our viewing area here. And that's Chris Pappas, well known to most folks in the area from his long history with the Puritan Restaurant, one of our signature businesses in the city of Manchester and known throughout the state. And
For generations.
for generations. I think you're the 4th generation, right?
Number
Is that
4, yeah.
Number 4. Yeah. Wow. And not only that, Chris has been a real contributor in so many ways. He's been Hillsborough County Treasurer. He's been an executive counselor. He served in the New Hampshire House, that great institution. And you know, he and his family have done so much for the city of Manchester and the surrounding areas. You need some help with a project, you can call them, and you're almost always going to get, yes, we'll do that for you.
So it's leadership through service.
It's leadership through service. And Chris, I can tell you he is a Harvard graduate. He has run marathons. He's been on The Price is Right and won some money. I mean, he's done all these cool things, and he still makes ice cream if you get the chance to see him doing that up at the Puritan. And he had a very, very contested race to be the nominee of the Democratic Party for CD1, Congressional District 1. There were some like 11 candidates, very credible candidates, almost all of them. I think you can say all of them were credible candidates with a lot to offer, and yet he emerged victorious in a primary, a week ago plus a day.
And not only volume, Bob, but intensity as well. There was a lot of money spent in that campaign.
There was a lot of money spent. And I'm happy to say the most money was not spent by the Pappas campaign, but another contestant, Morris Sullivan, recently of Portsmouth. And you know, it's just kind of satisfying to me to say the one that spent the most money was not the one that prevailed this time. You know, we're told that so often that's the case.
Ground game, organization.
Ground game,
hard
organization, hard work, commitment to the community. All of that we have with Chris Pappas. So, with all that, Chris, welcome. We're glad you're here for the time we can have you.
It's great to be with you, and I'm really excited, not just with the result on last Tuesday for my own campaign, but the incredible turnout that we saw here in Manchester and across the district. It was a record for Democrats.
About 121,000 Democratic votes cast.
Yeah.
It wasn't more than that. It was 126, didn't it?
I think it was about 126.
Really?
But we saw new registrants and just people coming out in numbers where they typically don't vote in these sort of midterm primaries. So I think that bodes well for November. It shows that people are interested and are paying attention. And I have to say, after being a candidate for 10 months, I feel better at the end of the 10 months, having met so many incredible people, towards so many great businesses around the district, about our ability to be able to look out for one another and make progress and come together and get some things done. I think that element is missing in Washington, D.C. right now. And that's why I'm a candidate, because I think I can apply the lessons that I know from our own state house, the values by which people lead their own lives here in New Hampshire, to try to make a difference for the people of a state that I love and a city that's given me so many opportunities in life.
And you've given so much back to our city too, Chris. It's just wonderful that you have taken this opportunity. Was it a hard decision to decide to run for Congress as opposed to continuing to be an executive council, or maybe even run for, higher state office like governor?
It was a tough decision, and I spent about a month thinking about it seriously before I got in after Carol Shea Porter retired. And some people told me, don't do it. You can make a bigger difference here at the State House or here in your own community than you can in Washington. And people told me the system's broken, there's nothing you can do about it. And I don't want to believe that this is as good as it's going to get for our country. That sort of the gridlock and the zero-sum game that we have in Washington, D.C. is par for the course. That the system that is tilted in favor of the special interests and the biggest corporations and against working and middle-class Americans is going to be how our democracy moves forward for decades and centuries to come. I want to do something about it. And even in incremental ways, if we can address this and produce some results on issues that are important to people here in New Hampshire, produce some wins for middle-class families and Main Street businesses, then I think it'll be a time well spent. So I'm optimistic about what we can accomplish once this is all over and the dust settles from this election. I think we desperately need a check and a balance on Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress.
I think that's what this election is all about, is having a check on our, rather erratic president, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, as an executive counselor, I've worked with governors of both parties. I've served alongside Maggie Hassan and also now with Chris Sununu. And I found, regardless of party, there are ways that you can work together with a chief executive on the issues that are important to people. So I have that perspective of being willing to work with people of the other party when it's right for your district. And I'll take that same tack in Washington. But I think you also have to be willing to stand up to people when they're wrong, when they're espousing some really hateful and disgusting views, as we've seen over the past year and a half, or when they're pushing an agenda that's undermining middle-class opportunity.
You had a tough primary. You had, many competitors, at least one of who outspent you in terms of, spending on public advertising. And yet we had a unity breakfast 2 days after the primary, and it seemed to me like there was a good, strong support for you as our nominee, which you certainly are. Do you think the party truly is united to support your candidacy?
It is united, and I've been really humbled by the support from the other candidates who were in this race, and I never really looked at them as my opponents. I think we were on the same journey together, wanting to get to the same place, where we had checks and balances in Washington and an agenda that was going to help the people of New Hampshire. So I'm really pleased that Maura Sullivan and the many other candidates in this race, Mark McKenzie, Mindy Messmer, have pledged their support and are willing to help us out over these next 7 weeks or so. We need them. We need everyone. We need to be speaking not just to Democrats and progressives, but to independents and Republicans too, and we're going to make the case to all the voters of this district.
Very important, because this is the more difficult of our two congressional districts for a Democrat. There's just
The swingingest swing district in the country. They say they're.
Is that right? Is that
Well,
what they say?
that's how it's being reported on the news. That and when you look at it from Ginta to Shea Porter to Ginta to, it really did swing like a pendulum. And what we're trying to do here is keep two terms in a row on the Democratic side, I think, and maybe slow that swing down a little bit.
Well, and I think it's about how you conduct yourself in office. And the work I've been most proud of on the Executive Council has been work that I've done for constituents, where you help them with really personal issues, where you can get directly involved in their case and try to make a difference. I think as a member of Congress, even in a divided climate, if you have a good constituent operation, if you're really present in the district, you're constantly working to understand the challenges and are looking for ways for Washington to help, that's where you can, I think, build a reputation over time. And I think that's the important work that needs to be done, and that's where my attention will be.
Okay. Well, I guess I learned from just our brief time before we came on the air here, only 48 days left till the election. Is that right?
That's it. It's coming up quick.
So you're gonna. It's good that you're young and healthy and vigorous, because that's gonna be
sprint.
That's gonna be quite a sprint. Going back to the primary again, you were heavily attacked by some of the people who I'm happy to say now have joined forces to be behind your candidacy about your position on health care, and particularly why you didn't come out and just say, I want to support the very popular slogan, Medicare for All. Would you like to talk a little about that, about whether there was some hesitancy there and what it was about?
Well, I think healthcare is a critical issue, because families know that you can have coverage, but it may not work for you when you need it. When someone gets sick, you have high out-of-pocket costs.
We're seeing more of those policies coming back now
Yeah.
with the relaxing of the requirements of the Affordable Care Act.
That's exactly right. And I think we've got to build on what the Affordable Care Act represents, not just rip it away. Because anytime politicians are putting their own political interests ahead of the well-being of patients, of consumers, it's just wrong, and I think we've got to stop it. What we're seeing is a Congress and a president that's sought to repeal the ACA outright, take away coverage from tens of millions of Americans. They're in court trying to take away protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions, which is half the adult population in New Hampshire.
Well, everybody's going to have pre-conditions sometime.
That's it. And so we've got to look for ways to bring down costs, I think, is what we've got to address in the short term.
But on the Medicare for All question, Medicare, such as it is right now, is very popular, doesn't cover 100% of everything. the argument is that if it's less expensive on the whole than the current system, and if it was applied to everybody, we could save money and insure everybody.
Yeah.
What it sounds glorious. What's
Yeah,
your
well,
understanding?
I think that Medicare has a good track record of keeping down costs versus private insurance, and I support legislation that would allow individuals and small businesses to opt into Medicare as another choice. I think we also need to add a public option to the exchange. That was something that wasn't able to get done when the ACA was passed, but could be really important at making sure that there's another option for consumers here in New Hampshire, as we've seen prices on the individual marketplace go up and up. In a response to what this administration has done, pulling back on these cost-sharing reductions that levels out increases over time. So I think we've got to be pragmatic about this, but we've got to understand that, as long as the big drug companies and the insurance companies are in the driver's seat, it's going to be a race to the bottom in terms of coverage. So we have to look for ways, especially on the drug front, to rein in these artificial increases that we see for medications that just don't make any sense. And I think there needs to be additional oversight to prevent people from getting hit in their pocketbooks for medications that they need to live and lead healthy lives.
Which are the same medications you can get in Europe and elsewhere for far less. So it's not mandatory that these prices be maintained in order to keep the pharmaceutical companies in business. They're finding a way to do it in other markets.
That's right. That's right. And we should open up, allow people to purchase drugs in Canada. We should ensure that there isn't money being spent on advertising or too much money on overhead. And if we see, these sort of large spikes in the price of drugs, Health and Human Services or an agency of the federal government should be able to stop it to prevent consumers from being gouged.
Sticking on the healthcare issue for a while, I've heard you say many times as you were campaigning before the primary election that at the Puritan you did provide health care to your employees. And was that a hard thing to do?
It's pretty extraordinary in the
It's
restaurant business.
it's not. It's a very vibrant business in the city. Everybody loves the Puritan. But was that a hard thing to do? Was that a tough call for you or your family?
Well, we've been doing it as long as I can remember, and certainly before the ACA came along and mandated it, because it's the right thing to do. And I think it's the right thing for us as a country to look out for one another, to look to increase optimal health outcomes and not deny coverage or care to people that need it. So I think that healthcare should be a right and not a privilege in this country, and I'll look for ways to advance that argument and
in your
expand.
restaurant, does this apply to employees as soon as they become full-time?
As soon as an employee signs up for work, I believe there's a 60 or a 90-day period, and after that they get on our plan. And I think it's a significant cost for businesses,
Yeah.
but it's the right thing to do to invest in your workforce. You want people to be healthy, to focus on wellness and the things that will allow them to be not just healthy but economically secure.
Yeah.
And those things go hand in hand.
I think the workforce at the Puritan is very enthusiastic about their jobs. I mean,
Well, there are people that have worked there
Didn't
for-
we have the marshal of the Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade as a longtime employee at the Puritan,
Absolutely.
and she was.
Yes.
And you said, I understand that your employers are pretty tough, and she went, what?
Well, my tongue was in my cheek when I was saying that.
I know you did that.
But
Okay.
I mean, the experience speaks for itself. The folks that work for you, I know you, a cook that Cripe. I've known him since I was a kid. He was worked for you. He's 60 years old now, I think. So
Yeah.
I don't want to say his name on the air, but you keep your employees, and that's because you treat them right.
Well, and when you grow up in a business like that, you learn a lot about the world around you. And I was taught that it's not about the bottom line. It's about how you can relate to people around you, how you can help and serve others. That led me to get into public service in a way. But I think that's how most people, treat members of their extended family, people that are in their communities. They look for ways to help others. The values by which people lead their daily lives here in New Hampshire, decency, integrity, community, it's missing in Washington right now.
Yeah.
And
It's pretty nasty.
we need a reality check for what we're seeing in Washington, D.C., because we're so much better than what we're seeing.
Well, you're going to have to leave us pretty soon. I'd like to talk a little bit. We've talked about policy and the things that are important to you, but I'd like to get back a little bit to the campaign trail. Do you feel that the primary that you went through has made you a better candidate coming out of it? I mean, you've got your stump speech pretty well down. You know what I mean? don't you get a benefit out of a little slugfest like this?
Yeah, I mean, there is a benefit because you're on stage with 11 other people at a couple dozen forums, and you're able to pick up things from these other candidates that are really sharp individuals and have contributed immensely to the state. So I really appreciate what we've all done together. I think at focusing on a message that's going to resonate with voters this fall. At the end of the day, to me, it's not about me personally. This campaign, it's about the state that I live in and trying to help people. And I've met some incredible individuals along the way and stories that I'll never forget. Stories about people going through tough times, stories about resiliency, stories about local businesses that have been hit hard and others that are thriving. And I think that gives me a strong roadmap to be able to give voice to these concerns and express them loudly and clearly in Washington, D.C. in a way that potentially we can get some help and move some solutions
Well,
forward.
speaking of get some help, you're not going to be able to get yourself elected to Congress all by yourself out there,
Yeah.
just yelling in the wind. You're going to need some help. You've built a pretty substantial campaign. You've got a good number of volunteers out working for you. If someone wants to get involved in your campaign, how do they do it?
Yeah, the website is chrispappas.org. You can find us on social media. Our headquarters is right here on Eddy Road in Manchester, so encourage people to stop on by. This is really a campaign that's built from the ground up. It's not about having the most money at the end of the day. It's about the conversations that we have face-to-face with voters all across New Hampshire. So we're going to continue to do that for the next 7 weeks. We're hoping that we come out on top, but I don't think we'll get there without a lot of help and support from people that we meet along the way. So thanks for plugging that.
Yeah, that's very important.
Well, it seems to me like there's just tremendous energy and enthusiasm in the Democratic side in this year, and it's very heartening for me because I'm running too, of course, and I'm just become very, very optimistic. And well, let me turn to Chris, if you can. What are the other top issues that you want to see some progress on? And maybe we start with, people are so fed up with the extreme bipartisanship in Congress. Do you have anything that you think you contribute to try and bridge the divide between the people on one side and the people on the other? Is there a way you can suggest where you might help with that?
Well, I think I've learned from the lessons and experiences of the State House and of my own community. And I think that it starts with relationships. It starts by understanding who others are, what their experience is, what kind of district they represent, and looking for ways that you can work together. And I think that whether it's the opioid crisis or veterans health care or funding infrastructure or protecting our natural environment, we've got to be able to find partners across the aisle to work on some of these issues, and I will seek them out on day one. I think that we've got to make sure we focus on working people and middle-class families. I continue to believe, whether it's the tax legislation or other major pieces of legislation that we've seen come through this Congress, that the playing field is tilted against working people. And we've got to make sure that the American dream is a realistic possibility for people that work hard, play by the rules, and reach for it. And I think we can't settle for the fact that there's a growing income inequality in this country, and
Right.
that there are many people who work hard but just can't stay ahead in this economy and provide for their families.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I think we've got to protect basic human rights, whether it's the right to choose or the right to marry. All that's wrapped up in the Supreme Court nomination, certainly.
Very
We've got to ensure that we protect our natural environment, that we work on policies that can attract more young people to New Hampshire, because we've got a demographic challenge where we price a lot of young people out of education and out of starting their careers here in state. And I think we've got to have checks and balances and oversight. It's just so fundamental. I've never felt that a midterm election was as important as this one is, because we have an EPA that's controlled by coal lobbyists in the oil and gas industry.
Yep.
We have Betsy DeVos at the Department of Education.
All for
We have Donald
privatizing
Trump
education.
as president, who's dividing Americans left and right and has a very unstable trade policy and position on the world stage with respect to our allies or our traditional allies. So Congress can play a role at reining that in, making sure we adhere to the values of this country and looking for ways to address issues that are going to improve the lives of people. And that's where my focus will be.
Hey, we're almost out of time with Chris. He's got some other things. But do you want to do your lightning round?
Oh no, that was just for the primary. That was just for the primary. Right now we're 100%. We were trying to.
Let me do your lightning round.
Fair enough, if you'd like to.
Gun safety. What would you do about that?
Yeah, I think we need universal background checks. Those are widely supported. And I think we need to look for ways to actually see some action on this, because we've got nothing but thoughts and prayers from Congress, but there are common sense policies we can push forward that are going to save lives.
How about advancing toward renewable clean energy? What would you do on that?
Absolutely, and I've taken that on as a member of the Executive Council. We need to invest in renewables. I think we need to pull away the supports that exist for fossil fuels and dirty technologies, invest it in the future that can create more jobs right here, and make sure that we address climate change in a meaningful way.
How about the apparently intractable problem, but it shouldn't be, immigration and refugees?
Yeah, we benefit here in New Hampshire from welcoming new Americans to our communities. And I think it's a shame the way that we have citizens who have been here, whose family members' status have been questioned. I think of the Indonesian community in Dover
Right.
and Somersworth that have been scrambling to produce paperwork and to ensure that they can stay right here in New Hampshire. I think of refugees that I know that work for me at my restaurant, and I'm glad that they're here because they're contributing to our community and are doing well in New Hampshire. I think of dreamers, and there are over 1,000 dreamers in New Hampshire who know no other country than the United States, and they should have a pathway to citizenship here. So I think that we need to adhere to the values that built this country. Immigrants built this country. We can't slam shut the golden door of America.
Right, okay. Well, I think...
How do you do?
Fine by me.
All right.
Of course. I think, Chris, probably you need to leave us, but...
Well, thanks for the
but
opportunity, and I'll be
I'm
back.
certainly- I would be glad to have you come back. You just
Okay,
let us
sure.
know. This forum will be available to you anytime, and we certainly wish you well. I think, folks, this district, this CD1 here in New Hampshire, is absolutely critical to what the shape of the Congress is going to be after the election in November 6th. Absolutely critical. It has a marginally, it tilts marginally in terms of voter registration in favor of Republicans, but it has been won by many fine candidates, including Carol Shea Porter, who we honor and celebrate for her service, which I think was very distinguished and honorable. And I think we have a worthy successor to Carol Shea Porter and Chris Pappas. So thank you for joining us, Chris, and be well and be a happy warrior.
Thanks. We will. We'll see you soon.
Glad to have
Okay.
you.
And we'll be right back, folks. We'll take a break, and we'll be back with more of the Progress Report for this Wednesday, September 19th. Okay, this is the Progress Report, Wednesday, September 19th. In 2 days, folks, it's going to be fall. Kind of a little taste of that today. And, I was looking at the Channel 9 weather, and by God, they had their first foliage report up. So that's where we're at. And
Done.
apparently, you want to see some foliage, you can go way up to Pittsburgh, and you can see a little color. But in any event,
I'll
it's-
wait till it gets down here.
it's going to get here. It's going to come down here. In any event, we've just had a wonderful time with Chris Pappas, who's now the nominee for the Democratic Democratic nominee for Congressional District 1.
Excuse me.
And he's had to leave because he has lots of things demanding his time right now, including tonight.
No sleep till D.C.
No sleep till D.C. So we are back on schedule with, and by the way, I hope, if I haven't mentioned, everybody should be aware you can join us by calling 640-3091. And what's the online thing?
And you can also watch us live streaming on manchestertv.org. Just click the 23 icon and you'll get our fine, beautiful faces on your computer.
You will. And I guess it's time, a little later than usual, but never too late, for the POTUS Report and the Progress Report.
Yeah, we wanted
Mike Farley
We
at
wanted
his
to take
best.
advantage of Chris while he could be here with us. And well, for this week's POTUS Report on the Progress Report, as I was saying before the show, Bob, usually, my radar picks up a story that I try to pay attention to, and I pull it out of what's going on in the news. But this week, it seemed that the president was surprisingly quiet. And there was a lot of other things going on. The big issue that came up with the Supreme Court nomination, and of course the hurricane and flooding down in North and South Carolina, and his blunder talking about talk about climate change denial. He's denying the death toll from the hurricane in Puerto Rico.
Maria,
So he got a little quiet. So I went to my old standby. I went to Mike Capuano's website, capuano.house.gov. Sad to see him go. Mike Capuano, a good, fine progressive, been in Congress for a long time, but defeated by another progressive, Ayanna Pressley, Boston City Councilwoman. Mike's been a good congressman, but let's hope that Ayanna can do a better job than even he did. But folks, he does have a very interesting feature on his website, capuano.house.gov. It's a little icon over on the left-hand side that he calls "Pull Away the Curtain." And in that, when you click that, you're going to get a list of, it's over 300 government policy changes and things that are happening in the Trump administration that are going on under the radar, behind the Sturm und Drang that's going on in our 24-hour news cycle. So I thought I would pull a few of those up, and I'm just going to read them until the 3-minute bell goes off, and we can talk about those a little bit. The first one that comes up is an August 2018 BuzzFeed News report. Members of Trump's Florida resort and golf club Mar-a-Lago are getting tours of Air Force One as an informal perk. They obtained records through the Freedom of Information Act that strongly suggest that it's a common practice. Those records were obscured due to significant redaction of the guest list from Mar-a-Lago. I find that hilarious. Of information by the federal government. In response to the report, the White House dodged the question by claiming it was common practice for friends and family of the president to receive tours of Air Force One. So all you got to do is pay what's the entry fee at Mar-a-Lago? A couple $100,000, and you can
it's certainly in that range or more, I think.
and you can be considered friend and family of Donald Trump. Next item, August
Jesus.
2018 Washington Post story describes a president who, to put it bluntly, lies a lot. The Post determined that Trump made 2,140 false claims in his first year. In the last 6 months, that number nearly doubled to 4,229. The newspaper studied a July 5th rally speech Trump gave in Montana and determined 76% of the 98 statements he made were false or misleading. Next item, in August, we have an August 2018 report from the Government Accountability Office finding that the Department of Homeland Security did not fully analyze the projected costs of Trump's border wall or adhere to current acquisition rules as it makes plans for this key Trump priority. In the report, the GAO raised concerns that the DHS has not effectively planned for the project and faces an increased risk that the border wall system program will cost more than projected, take longer than planned, or not fully perform as expected. And we could go on and on. I've got several pages, but there's a lot going on. It impacts people's lives very dramatically, but it's not being reported because of the circus that the news is fixated on.
So you have a rich trove there from Peter Capuano, and yet he lost his primary race to a Boston City Councilwoman.
There's a mood out there in the country. And
Well, is there? I mean, you talk
We've
about
had
her,
this discussion,
You
Bob.
could talk about Alexandra Ocasio, whatever her name is, Cortez.
Remember
you could
now-
talk about the Gillum in the Florida gubernatorial race.
Well, that's a different thing.
But you can talk about Andrew Cuomo crushing Cynthia Nixon in
You
the
can.
New York
Yeah.
primary. And, in a way, I think you could even look at the New Hampshire. A lot of people were willing to tag Chris Pappas as being the establishment candidate because
He was. I think he was.
Well, he had endorsements from Maggie and Jeannie Shaheen.
That's how you identify the
and John
establishment
Lynch, our
candidate,
former
Bob.
government, and yet he won a compelling victory over 11 candidates, including one who outspent him by a significant amount.
He did.
So I don't know. You can say this is the time to shine for the people that are consider themselves to the left of the most Democrats or progressives or Democratic socialists, whatever. I'm not sure of that. Go ahead, it's your turn.
Well, if you reviewers of the Progress Report will recall, just last week, when I was speaking with Gene Martin about the election results, I made it very clear the progressives in New Hampshire and especially in Manchester got thumped pretty soundly. Mm-hmm. And I think what that says is what I, as a progressive, have been saying, that each individual district, this is a small unit, this is small ball. We're not going to have a national campaign, I think, and be effective. It has to be small ball. And I think here in New Hampshire, it may very well be. I mean, look at, Steve Marchand, he ran a long campaign. He ran a very concise campaign. He worked very hard.
Yeah.
He had a very, very forward-leaning progressive message.
He certainly did.
And he took a thumping. So I think you got to be pragmatic in politics, and it looks like here in New Hampshire and here in Manchester, although there's a solid progressive base here, it's not quite as fully developed as it is in other places. I want to talk a little bit about Mike Capuano's district and about Alexandria Ocasio-Casey's district. Those are both districts where the Democrat who wins the primary is going to be the congressman. Those are heavily Democratic districts. So I think it's more logical that you're going to find in those districts that the debate is between the mid-left and the far left, whereas in a much more purple district like and state like we have here in New Hampshire, I don't think the debate has shifted there quite so far yet.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic. I believe that the progressive message is a message that resonates with working class Americans, with labor people. And I think it's a strong, solid message. But I've been believing in that message for 40 years, and it was not popular 30, 40, 20, 30 years ago, and it's becoming increasingly popular. Is it here yet? Maybe, maybe not. That's not going to change my conviction that it's a good message.
Well, I find good news in all of this because I think that, there was a great concern that I shared that there was a real divide in the Democratic Party between the progressives, the Democratic Socialists, whatever you want to say, and the people that had the support of the, quote, establishment. And I'm not sure that's really going to be a factor because I think the overwhelming sentiment among Democratic voters and lots of independents that are going to join them.
That's the key right there.
Is there is a national emergency and we can't afford to have these kind of fights. We got to elect Democrats. We got to have a check on this president. As every POTUS report shows, we have to have a check on this president. And if we don't control one or both houses of Congress, but at least one, there will be no check on this president. We'll be on the descent into even more fascist tendencies. I have to just
Well,
say
we
that.
saw there was an interview last night. Hillary Clinton was on the Rachel Maddow show, and quite frankly, personally, I would prefer that she did not make public statements. I don't think she's helpful. You may disagree.
I do.
But in any event,
Anyway.
she did make a prediction that she feels that once this election is passed, Trump will feel liberated, and he's going to have some wholesale firings, and he's going to be an even worse loose cannon than we have right now.
I
And
heard
without
that.
the checks in Congress, boy, that could really develop into a problem. And we do have a real problem with hypocrisy in the Republican Party. New Hampshire was a Republican state my whole life growing up.
Me
Most
too.
of the people I know are Republicans. I have very good friends who are Republicans. They don't, they really had a lot of fun bringing up politics with me during the 8 years of Barack Obama. Oh boy, they had a lot to say. They're quiet as crickets now. And I think they're embarrassed. They're still Republicans. And see, that's where I have a problem. Again, if you support a racist, what does that make you? I have a problem with that, and I hope that people are searching their souls, and maybe they can't choke down the taste of becoming a Democrat, but I would hope that at least they could be an independent voter and consider both sides of an issue. But I really think the Republican Party has some serious soul searching to do. 400 plus days without a Supreme Court justice was fine when it was Merrick Garland, but now
Obama's nominee.
in the face of overwhelming. The dominoes are falling now. We have a man who was in the room who cannot recall. We have a woman who was a classmate of the accuser who says, "Oh yes, this was discussed contemporaneously at the time." We have a therapist years ago who would be able to, given the waiver of privilege, to testify. There's evidence out here. They won't investigate it. Okay, fine. Okay, you want to play hardball. I get it. I get what the president's doing. That's fine. You have an agenda. You do not want to know the truth. If I were Merrick Garland and what I said was true, that no, it never happened, I was never there, I would be screaming for an investigation to prove that. Because if that's true, that's what the investigation will prove. Now,
Yeah,
I'm
maybe.
not hearing Merrick Garland screaming for an investigation. And on the argument, folks, that well, it's years and years ago, and and hey, I'm the first to say people can change, and you can't judge a person on one event in their life. I will sing that to the angels, but he lied. If it did happen, his denial is a lie. And do we want a liar? We got one in the White House. Do we want another? We already have one perjurer on the Supreme Court. Do we want another perjurer on the Supreme Court?
Yeah. So I got a story I want to tell you, Mike, and our viewers out there. I have a good friend who's a state rep from up in Lancaster named Herb Richardson, and last year he switched his allegiance from the Republicans to the Democrats. So he's running for re-election as a Democrat up in Lancaster.
Why did he do that? Did he talk to you about that? I'm curious about someone who's elected to public office on one ticket. Did he give you any insight?
Well, he
as
was
to-
very,
I mean,
very,
we can guess,
he was
you know.
very, very upset with Governor Sununu over his action on the energy bills. I mean, he's a big supporter of the biomass energy, renewable energy plants that we had, and I can talk about the override on that, which was quite exciting and
deal.
very interesting. But in any event, I told Herb, I said, I would like to see you get reelected. It may be tough in Lancaster. That's not exactly a Democratic, stronghold. And I said, I can call the son of a former Republican governor. His name is Peter Powell. His father was Wesley Powell from Hampton Falls, who was a Republican governor a long time ago. A lot of people aren't going to remember Wesley Powell, but I do. And I remember his son, Peter Powell. And I said, I'll call Peter Powell, and I did today. You know what Peter Powell told me? He's left the Republican Party. He's gone rogue. He's become undeclared. He said he just can't stand it anymore.
Well, that's a man with integrity.
It's a man with integrity.
And I call out to our Manchester Republicans.
And
the same.
I was not expecting that result at all. I thought maybe he knew Herb and would be willing to say I'm going to support Herb even though he's a Democrat. No problem at all. Now, he hasn't quite become a Democrat. He's gone undeclared, but he's left the Republican Party, and he's the son of a former Republican governor. So think about that. That's up in the great North Country in the town of Lancaster. So, I was quite heartened by that. Now, you mentioned the overrides that we had faced last Thursday. Last Thursday, we were called back to Concord. No mileage paid, by the way. I don't know why that was. But we still had a pretty good turnout. And we have to deal on there were, I think, 5 overrides, vetoes of bills that it was by the governor.
That's why the mileage wasn't paid.
And the first 3 bills originated in the House, so we got those right away. And every one of those bills, the House overwhelmingly voted to override the governor's veto. And these were not by by Democrats, because we don't have the majority. This was an overwhelming override supported by the Republicans. And then there came over to us the first bill from the Senate that the Senate had passed, which was to support the biomass industry for our renewable energy goals. The wood chip burning plants that we have, you've probably seen them. Drive up 89, you see the one in Springfield. You drive up 93, you see the one in Bridgewater just outside Plymouth. And
one of them closed 3 days after the bill passed.
One of them closed 3 days after
bit of legislation.
Well, after the governor vetoed.
After the veto.
After the veto, one of them closed, and some of the others have already started buying fuel, wood chips from our forestry guys. Some of them canceled orders from equipment. So this was a critical thing. This vote came out to us as the 4th vote we had in the morning, and we had the vote, and it passed the override passed with exactly the number needed, not one extra vote. And the kicker, which just makes me smile every time, I told you about this earlier,
It was in the paper.
one of the Republicans pushed the wrong button. He pushed the button to support the override when he intended to sustain the veto.
Can I just jump in, just out of kindness? I know it's a Republican, but having served in the House, sometimes you literally need to be instructed. If you want to say yes, push the red button. You know what I mean? Sometimes the way it's written, you have to listen carefully to the instructions, which is why they have those parliamentary inquiries.
That's right, which have nothing to do with parliamentary procedure whatsoever.
They're a way to signal to the crowd exactly what button each party wants them to push. Now, Bob, let me ask this. I seem to remember, and I could be dead wrong, I apologize if I am, But I seem to remember a vote in the House that I was at where a representative pushed the wrong button and went down to the clerk and made the explanation, and the vote was corrected.
No.
Am I wrong in that?
You're wrong. All you can do in that is to say, I did not intend to vote the way I did. Please put my true intention in the permanent journal.
That must have been what was happening.
But the vote is the vote. You can't unring it. There can be no reconsideration on overrides. So this passed with a bare minimum. And then came up the next bill, which was to increase the net metering cap from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts. I thought this is going to be an easy one to override.
And that's the solar power one, right? That's
Solar
the one
power
where they
and
have to buy
hydropower.
back- They have to buy back whatever energy is produced.
And we had 6 mayors of Manchester cities, including Joyce Craig, our mayor here in Manchester, who wanted that bill to be over, that veto to be overridden, because we have this, landfill you've all seen out in Dunbarton Road, Mount Manchester, they used to call it, which isn't going to be garden apartments anytime soon. But it is a great site for some solar collectors, and those solar collectors could be numerous enough and large enough to generate more than 1 megawatt of power, which will help the city meet its energy needs at lower cost, and which we can then sell the excess power that the city can't use on a particular time back to the grid and get paid a decent price for the power we're providing the grid, just like other generators, whether it's Seabrook or the wood plants or anybody else, can do. And yet that one failed by just a few votes. Hard to explain. But my explanation is only that the Republicans have been leading the charge on this, and after 3 and then 4 consecutive votes to override, they figured they have to give the boss of their team 1. So they picked that one. I don't know whether that's true or not.
Is that the only one that didn't get overridden?
No, the other one that didn't get overridden, and it seriously hurts me to say this, was the death penalty. But that
I forgot.
that was
Yeah,
not.
you're right.
They did not get the override of that in the Senate, so we never got to vote on it. Both houses have to have the 2/3 vote, of course, to be an override, and that one never came out of the Senate, so we could vote on it. It was a very, very, very unhappy thing for me, because I just don't think the state should be in the business of executing people, or in the business of killing people, which is really what it's all about.
Well, it'll come back next term.
And it will,
always
and it
does.
will, yeah. So, those are some interesting things that happened in Concord on our last day back before the new legislature is elected in November, and we get to organize and decide who our speaker's going to be, and
And the Secretary of State's going to be
oh yeah.
hotly contested.
And by the way, I have just booked, I think I maybe sent you an email, Mike, I don't know if you've seen it. Colin Van Ostern, who is as our candidate for governor last time and narrowly lost to Chris Sununu. He's been an executive counselor, a very, very accomplished person in my opinion. And he is mounting a very unusual campaign to run a contest for Secretary of State. We have a Secretary of State, legendary in New Hampshire. His name is Bill Gardner. He served 19 terms. That's 38 years, folks. 38 years. He's never faced a serious challenge in his to keeping his job, and his job is dependent upon the wishes of the majority of the new legislature, which will be sworn into office, early in the new year.
That's one of those funny things that we have state officers who are not elected by the people. They're elected by the people's representatives. The state treasurer is another one.
State treasurer's another one. The sergeant at arms, as well, that's in Freach House, and then the Secretary of State. He has always been elected, whether it's a Republican majority or a Democratic majority, year after year after year. And this time, for the first time, he has a significant opposition, and that's from Colin Van Ostern, as I said, our former candidate for governor in the last election. So that's going to be very interesting, and we will have him on the show.
Good.
He'll be coming on the show, I think, in mid-October, probably our
I'd like to talk to
second
him
or
about
third
that.
time in October. So we'll be having him on, and it's a very interesting thing to have happen.
Bill Gardner served for decades, very ably and with dignity, and he's a font of historical information. He has
Nobody
retained
knows the history of New Hampshire
everything
politics
he's
like him.
ever seen or heard.
And the primary, you want to know anything about the New Hampshire primary, who ran in 1960 or 1968?
He's got it right at the tip of his
right
finger.
at the tip of his
Yeah.
tongue. It's an impressive thing.
But he did. He got himself involved in it, and it's in some ways it's too bad that the mud of Trumpism kind of splashed onto him. He got
He
himself
did, but he
involved
got
for noble intentions.
Well, I don't know. I guess his intentions were noble.
I think his personal
His-
intentions were to bring some.
Yeah, he wanted to push back against the Trump claim that the election was rigged, and that, for example, New Hampshire, Trump kept saying, busloads of people from Massachusetts came up here and voted in our presidential primary when they weren't entitled to. Well, there were some buses, but you know what? They were, and some of them had Massachusetts license plates. But you know what? They were carrying New Hampshire voters. They weren't carrying Massachusetts voters. But Trump has never accepted that, so he got in touch with this Secretary of State from Kansas named Chris Kobach, who's a real trumpeter type and totally anti-immigration. And he appointed him to be the head of a electoral integrity commission.
Which, by the way, is folded up and
Yep.
blown away, and nothing happened.
Trump did it with a tweet after several secretaries of state refused to provide voter file information to this commission. But Bill Gardner decided to accept a position to be on the commission, and he was. The only one and only meeting they ever had was right here at New Hampshire, your alma mater, St. Anselm, and that left a very bad taste in many people's mouth, that our Secretary of State lent the dignity of his office and his considerable personal reputation to this effort by Trump to try and discredit the election, even though he thought he could, help make the report balanced.
I think that was a mistake on his part, Bob. But I think that the other thing that happened was when he did eventually turn over the voter information from New Hampshire, his explanation of what was happening was muddled. And I know my first impression was that there was some very private information that was being turned over. He corrected that on our TV show, to my satisfaction anyway, that it was only the public record
yes, he did.
that was turned over. But in the news reporting, and much of which contained quotes from him, that message was not clear, and it appeared like people's personal information that is not part of the public record was being turned over, because that's what was being asked for.
Yep.
Social Security numbers and other information like that. So I think he might have been a victim of circumstances, but politics ain't beanbag.
That's right.
And he does have to get himself elected, so I'm sure that he's aware of the situation, and I'm sure that he's calling on House candidates and people who are going to be in the House, and he's letting them know what he needs them to know.
Right. So, folks, we're winding down on this show, and hey, we'd still love to have a call or two. Maybe everybody's watching the Red Sox play the Yankees, hoping the Red Sox clinch the division title tonight. But if you want to participate, it's the same. It's 640-3091. We'd love to have you participate. Very grateful to have Chris Pappas spend the time that he was able to spend with us. And I just want to say that if you don't know this, folks, there is a Democratic city headquarters right down on South Elm Street. I think it's 167 Elm. It's right on the corner of Hayward and Elm. And there's
Between Dead River Company and Spider Bite, across from Duncan's.
Yeah, that's right. And if you go down there, you're going to find some very enthusiastic and inspiring young people. There's lots of them there, and they're working hard, and the level of enthusiasm and energy is just incredible. There's people going out to canvass all the time. There was a mega canvass last weekend. Hope some of you got to participate. By the way, just one other thing I thought I'd bring up, Mike. Last weekend, on Sunday at your alma mater, St. Anselm, I went to hear Congressman John Delaney of Maryland speak.
Running for president?
He's been to New Hampshire 11 times.
Yeah, I think he's running for president.
What more do you need to say? He said this was his 11th visit to New Hampshire. He was extremely impressive. He had a really remarkable presentation, what the U.S. should look like in 2030. He says, well, that's 12 years away.
Nice
But
approach.
then he went back and said, well, what was going on 12 years ago? We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have selfies. He went on and on about how much things have changed and looking forward to how much things may change in the next 12 years. He's a very impressive guy. And then Monday, I was very pleased to see that Molly Kelly, I think our excellent candidate for governor, state senator from Keene, serving 3-4 terms, and as Mike mentioned, she did very well in the primary against Steve Marchand. She is the Democratic
and a
nominee.
short campaign. She really was
Short
a very
campaign.
compressed, intense campaign.
In any event, she had an event here at the YWCA right here on Concord Street, not far away, and it was about paid family leave. which we didn't quite get done because of Chris Sununu's stepping down to try and make a situation where the bill would not pass and he wouldn't have to make a decision to pass it. It's a really sad thing. Chris Sununu has called paid family leave a vacation. Right, when you want to be with your dying parent at a hospice and you can't do it because you don't have paid family leave, or you want to be with your spouse who may be having a baby and difficulties, those are not vacations, folks.
Yeah,
not vacations.
I flew down to be with my dying father during a hurricane in Jacksonville and did not get paid for it.
In any event, I'm pleased to say that one of the guests that Molly had there, and she had some outstanding guests, including Nikki Casey from Nashua we had on this program a while ago about the issue of opioid addiction, and she said there was a time when she could not get paid family leave and it really set her back in her recovery efforts. But with her was Governor Jay Inslee from the state of Washington, who happens to be a fellow I know because he was here in 2008 as one of 2 co-chairs for Hillary Clinton's environmental efforts, along with Carol Brown, our former EPA head. So I was really thrilled to see Jay Inslee back here, and maybe he'll be running for president. I'm certainly interested if he is, because I think he's an outstanding governor. He's the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association, so maybe that's why he was. Maybe he's not running for president, but in any event, that was a great event. And I do commend you to go out and listen and hear and try and go to an event where Molly Kelly is appearing, because she is going to be an excellent Democratic candidate. And I think Chris Sununu has got something to worry about when he faces Molly Kelly, who's got an incredibly powerful personal story too, by the way. She's dealt with a lot of real tough situations in her life, being a single mom and trying to get a college degree when she was raising children. She's done a lot of very impressive things. So we have a great team coming up in these elections that are going to be happening just 48 days from now. And if you are interested and want to participate, I hope you will get out and do it. There's a great joy in doing this. This is a good way to contribute to our democracy. And frankly, we may need to save this democracy from some of the tendencies of this current president, which are pretty alarming. So that's what I got to say about that.
Can I say one more thing just to add to that, folks? Please. One more thing. If you're fixing up your dinner, the days are getting shorter, the evenings are getting darker, and you're going to get a knock on the door from some young kid who's up here from out of state trying to help some candidate get elected and hand you a piece of cardboard with some information on it. Be nice to those guys. I know it can be a pain. It's interrupting. You're fixing up your dinner, you're watching your news or your TV show. These guys are really putting it all out there. Their heart's in the right place. Be a little understanding. Be nice to them.
Yeah. Be welcome, because they're going to be around. This is going to be
even if they're not your party. Even if they're not your party, they're out trying to save the world.
And I would just say, to wrap up here, which we're being told we got to do, we will do it. The voter turnout this time, 126,000 against the Bill Gardner prediction of 90,000 Democratic ballots, 126,000. There's energy here, folks. There's concern. We are going to right this ship if we get this right in November.
Don't be complacent, as they say. Trust in God, but mind your crops.
And vote.
And get out to vote.
Okay, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We hope we'll be back with another good show next week. We will be back with another good show next week. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon. Take care. Bye.